Are you turned on?
Thank you, James. Yes.
Thank you, Margaret. You're doing well today?
I am very well.
Yeah.
I made it through with minimal tears through Rent, so that's good.
How are the butterflies?
Butterflies are calming down.
Good. So we're going to begin at the very beginning. Where were you born?
I am a Midwestern girl. I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana. I am adopted. So my birth mother, on the night of a giant kind of natural accident in Indiana, went to the hospital in a cab to have me. And because there was a lot of hospital patients coming in with this emergency, he ushered my birth mother in and stayed with her for most of the time. I was adopted by a young minister and his wife, Presbyterian minister, and they had a congregation in Indianapolis and had been without children for some time. So I came home from the hospital a few days in the midst of the John F. Kennedy assassination in November of 1963, and the congregation, of course, came over to the house, and my mom described everybody this enormous joy of the baby, but then crying because they were watching television and all that. Wow. So that was the point in history.
Wow, that really is sort of a juxtaposition of two dichotomies, of the joy of a new child and
the pain of the country.
Right, the pain of the country. So what were your parents' names?
Joyce and Bill.
Joyce and Bill. And so your father, Bill, was a Presbyterian minister.
Correct.
What did your mom do?
So my mom was a teacher. Most of my family has either preachers or teachers. That's kind of what we do. There's a couple writers thrown in, but that's what we do. And my dad specialized in multiracial churches. At that time, a lot of the downtown churches were experiencing white flight, and so he would go into those ailing churches and would try to persuade people to work together, and somehow with the Holy Spirit, created amazing, ethnically diverse, but also, across the board, socioeconomic, etc. And my mom she was always a public school advocate.
Yeah.
So she eventually, when we settled in Kansas City, where we were for the bulk of the time that I grew up, she was the elected at-large board member and then eventually president of the Kansas City Board of Education during teacher strikes and desegregation trauma and lots of very hard times.
Wow. Right, so both of your parents were very community-oriented.
I would say,
yes. Reaching out into the community, trying to make
I have very big shoes.
Very big shoes.
Big legacy.
Yeah. So did you grew up going to church?
Yes, absolutely. All the time.
All
Constantly.
the time.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, my boys spent a lot of time tugging on my arm saying, "Mom, can we leave now?" And that's pretty much my memory of all those many hours. Like, "Mom, when do we get to leave?" It was a lot of hours at church. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And twice on Sundays?
Oh, yeah, I mean, many hours on Sundays, and then youth choir on Mondays, and, as we called them then, lock-ins and overnights, and church camp, and service projects.
Right. So growing up in the church, if you remember back as a child, what were some of your favorite memories of church as a child, looking back on that time now?
So the one I think many of you have heard, when I first got here, Paula Elizabeth was the interim, and she introduced the idea of having young children take communion, which is not at all the tradition in the Presbyterian Church. You wait until confirmation to take your first communion. And at first I really didn't like the idea, but I started thinking about my experience of communion as a child, and in our sanctuary as a kid, they had these kind of really brilliant brassy trays that they would take the communion around. And I remember as a really small child seeing the light dance on the ceiling of the church and thinking that was God dancing. So it's, I guess I came to understand that a child's view of God is no less extraordinary than an adult's, and that education doesn't necessarily make your understanding of the sacred more sophisticated or equal. So I love that about the United Church of Christ. I think that's what it is to be open and affirming is, everybody's viewpoint is important.
Yeah.
As different as we are, because we're very different.
Right. So that light dancing off of the ceiling was a powerful moment, a spiritual moment of thinking God was in the room with you.
Absolutely.
There was also another thing, and I want to pick your brain on this. You also were an advocate for another type of light on Christmas Eve. Can you talk about why that was important?
Right. So when there is sometimes a questioning of allowing children to have a real candle.
An open flame.
An open flame,
yes.
yes.
An open flame.
And as much as I am a safety proponent
What?
in church, I know, crazy,
What?
a little bit of a drill sergeant around safety, I remember holding that candle. And I think it's very important and very precious to give children that moment. And I think that's it.
Yeah, that responsibility.
Absolutely. No, they step into what it is to be sacred in that moment. They get it.
Yeah. So your dad is a minister
Yes.
and an advocate,
Civil rights leader.
leader.
Yes.
Your mom is a teacher and an activist. So growing up, what did you learn from them? And then now that you're an adult, what do you carry of their legacy with you and your ministry in your life now?
There are so many lessons I really do want to write a book about their values because I think their values have sadly gone out of style. But the two that I'll share, my dad my dad was a bus captain that gathered clergy together to go to the marches in Montgomery and Selma. He had Eli Lilly in his congregation, and that was a lot of money coming in. And he was fearless and said, I'm sorry, Eli Lilly, I'm sorry that you don't want me to go to these marches, but we're going to these marches. So I think it's pushing the boundaries of what church can be and do for the world. And then in my mom's case, the story that I shared at her memorial service was when my sister was in 3rd grade, my sister and I were about one of 7 white kids in an all African American school. Our parents believed in living in the communities where they worked, so we always had very diverse lives. So in that time, and I'm sure today still, they use these trailers as bungalows for the overflow of kids when the class sizes or when the schools are bigger. Mm-hmm. And so my sister was in the 3rd grade in a trailer. And my mom went to the mall one day and was walking through the mall and saw my sister's teacher at the mall. And she just got a sick feeling in her stomach. So she drove to the school and found that the teacher had locked 30 3rd grade students in the bungalow and left to go shopping. And when my sister and I became mothers, we were having her tell us this story again. And the most remarkable thing about it was that she did not pull my sister out of that class right away and say, absolutely, you're never seeing my child again. It took some weeks for the union processes, et cetera, for this woman to be fired. But my mom said, if I had taken you out, I would have left 29 kids in that class who didn't have the power to make the change.
Yeah.
So it was that presence that we will understand our privilege, and we will make sure that the world is different for others, even if it's at our own expense.
Yeah, that sacrifice.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, and
that
the courage.
Selflessness.
Yeah.
The fearlessness and and then the working within the system to change. She didn't just vote with her feet and leave. She knew how much her energy and her creativity and her smarts could bring. So, she rode out difficult times, and I think that's something that we tend to not do.
Yeah, patience.
Yeah.
Yeah, the patience to be able to see the
patience
bigger
linked
picture.
with the engagement.
Right. Hang on one second. I'm going to become a good pastor.
And get me some Kleenex.
And get you some
God
Kleenex.
love you.
So, here you go.
Thank you.
Here you go. So let's jump a couple of, a decade or so ahead, into somewhat of the present. When did you and your family move to San Diego?
Duke and I moved here 20-something years ago. more than that, when he was an active duty naval officer.
Okay.
And then we left for some time to do Navy stuff.
Yeah.
Navy duty stations in
Navy
cool
stuff.
places, Navy stuff,
Yeah.
Navy life. And then we came back when Duke was leaving the active duty. He was,
Yeah.
stayed on. And we moved to Normal Heights, so this was right in the neighborhood. And
Right. So the reason why you initially came into the church was because of proximity.
correct.
It was close.
Right.
Okay. So, but what compelled you to stay, come back the second, third, fourth time, and make this your community home?
Well, the way that you did church shopping then, you didn't have the website to scan, my poor husband, I have a criteria for having been a preacher's kid. I know within 5 minutes of being in a service.
There are certain
whether-
litmus tests that have to be
Indeed,
passed.
yes, a lot of litmus tests.
There has to be a pH balance. Right.
Yeah, I just trust my gut and
Yeah.
know from that experience. And I remember the very warm welcome of Betty Generali and Pauline Davis at the front door. They were, they were there every Sunday. So I think that is Kensington. It's a very warm, welcoming place. And then I think Lou was a solid preacher with
Yeah.
great theology. So
Right. So the welcome of the community, the particularly individuals, and then sort of the message.
Yes.
It made you feel comfortable that this
Yes.
was a place your family could be.
yes,
So you get here 17, 18 years ago,
19.
19 years ago,
Yeah.
and then about 7 or 8 years ago, this position of what was called Director of Religious Education comes forward. And so how did you hear about it, and what interested you in the position?
I don't entirely remember. I was very active in the church already. I was already editing the chimes. I knew, but I heard about it initially as a part-time position, and I felt called to it immediately. It stirred my heart. Our family was going through a lot at that time, and I just had a sense, I'm sure, from our background that serving others was the way to healing. So it was, it's a cool job. It's such a cool job. It's such a creative outlet. It's different every day. The pastoral care is very meaningful. I think I got to be a kid again so many times, and it's so much fun.
Right.
So.
Right. So it was a part-time job. It was initially said to be
Right,
a
it was
part-time job.
initially offered as a part-time, and after exploring it, I just knew it was a full-time gig.
Yeah.
So I waited, and the church blessingly took the leap of
Yeah.
faith, and when we didn't have the budget,
Sure.
and made it a full-time position. They were unable to attract the candidates with a part-time position at
Right.
that point.
Right.
So.
Right. So we, in the time that you've been here, we moved from it being called a Director of Religious Education to the Minister of Faith Programs or Faith Formations, and you really advocated for that change. Why did you advocate for that change from it being called Religious Education to Faith Formations or Faith
I don't
Programs?
think anybody wants to come to anything called religious education. I have worked, these incredible Sunday school teachers, volunteers. We try to take the school out of Sunday school because for our kids today, there is so much structure, there's so much sitting, there's so many demands on our youth in particular. I always say they're among the most stressed people I know. Mm-hmm. So I don't want Sunday to feel like religious education.
Yeah.
I want it to feel like a magical, fun place. And I think the biggest compliment ever is Christina Sanchez Kerr's boys saying, it feels like we're going to a birthday party every week, you know? It's a Jesus birthday party, so that's good.
That's excellent.
It's really good.
That's amazing. So 7, 8 years on as the Minister of Faith Programs. Lots of ups and downs. But if you had to pinpoint a few that you would say were my greatest successes, what would you say in terms of your time as Minister of the Faith Programs was your greatest success?
I think together we have expanded what it is to be the church in so many ways. When I think about my favorite event that we did here, my favorite big event that we did was the wedding at Cana. And we brought a belly dancer into our sanctuary. The kids completely acted out the wedding at Cana. They turned water into Kool-Aid, and you know, we danced the Hora and the Hava Nagila, and we raised, you know, Josie Crittenden, and I think it was Jonas up on chairs. We did, and it was intergenerational. Everybody did it together. So I think anytime you stretch the boundaries of this sitting is a really good thing. When we're dancing together, when we're serving together, you know, our whole lives, the human sexuality. I mean, we're seeing in the world why we need to have these conversations, you know, and why we need to have more extensive conversations, applying our values and understanding what it is to have interpersonal communication, how the power dynamic works in a relationship, what consent is, all of those things. You know, that's a part of Safe Church, and it's amazing that the congregation has embraced that. You know, the research shows that we, in education, we tend to, when we're teaching others, we go to the skill, the intelligence that we use best. So it's often talking, you know, it's often talk-based. But what our teachers have done is transform that, and what they've been challenged to do is think about the different learning styles in this congregation, and to, instead of just looking at a picture of the Sistine Chapel, we had kids underneath tables with the paper, you know, drawing the Sistine Chapel. I mean, that's so cool. Yeah, it's so cool. So I cherish the opportunity, when people showed up at our door, a Nigerian woman living in her car with an 11-year-old, desperate, that this congregation came out and did that we had Syrian refugees in our midst, that we helped. The transition took so little time, that we have nurtured and cared for the homeless. All the ways that we've been the church, but been bigger than the church. That's what we've done together.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been always so impressed by you, Mark, is the advocacy for children and youth with special needs, and creating a safe place for them to feel like they're part of the community.
Yes.
You want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so in my very early years, when we established the youth group, we invited Ben Mason, who has cerebral palsy, and some others to be in our group with us. And I think it was such an important part of our learning. And Edith told me that at that point, nobody had ever asked her to have Ben in our programs, and that Ben became one of the magi in the Live Nativity. And having students on the spectrum in our classrooms whose parents have said, we haven't been able to find a church where they could serve us. And that's Marcia Klaber's gift, and all these teachers' gifts, is we just problem solve and figure out what creative way we can engage different kids, active kids, kids who need to move around. And it's being the church. It's beautiful.
So if those are your greatest successes, then what is your most spectacular failure?
Well, you've seen them all. They've been right out there.
Well, we took a poll.
Oh, you took a poll? Good. Good
Mike,
to know.
Can you project that which were?
No, when you have big ideas and you have exacting visions, it is, I'm quite dictatorial and demanding of myself, of course, but God love these volunteers who have put up with me and my, big ideas. So big ideas are great, but they're not always collaborative, because they have to be done a certain way.
Right.
And I was laughing, again, my poor husband. He asked me if I needed anything at the commissary yesterday, and I said, yeah, we really need toilet paper. But I was like, I don't know if I can really trust you to get the brand that we like, because it is Charmin Ultra Soft Mega Double Roll. So from the commissary yesterday, he's sending me a picture. He's like, is this it? And it's like the Scott sandpaper. So, I beg forgiveness for all the times I said it has to be the Charmin Ultra Soft Mega Roll.
That's awesome. So I think you answered this, but so from those failures, what did you learn about yourself, and how did you grow from those?
Well, I think you have been such a tremendous gift to this congregation, because I think this congregation thinks big. So I was right there with them, and the problem is we thought big too often. And so we wore ourselves out doing too much. So I think you've been such a blessing to say, let's pace ourselves, let's keep things simple. And
I hear you calling me lazy, is what
no, that's not what I'm saying.
No, I'm just kidding.
No,
It's been a great partnership.
I think we have, I think we burned some people out. I don't think we're as collaborative as I could have been, and so I think that's such a gift.
I think we've been a great. I mean, I want to pat us on the back. I think we've been a great partnership in that you've stretched me to think bigger and to take chances and risks, and then I've helped maybe kind of reel you in a few times and say, like, I don't want to burn you out, and
yes, I think that's a gift to the service.
Yeah, right, and really has been the partnership part of our collaborative ministerial relationship. So I want you to kind of pull out your crystal ball, look into 10 years down the road. Where do you see faith programs going in this church, or maybe in the greater church, going in the 21st century?
I think in the advent of technology, I think churches are going to become more like WeWorks, kind of community sacred resource centers, because so much of what we can learn in this place can be gained through technology. So what we have is our community and the sharing, but we also, and you are so good at this, is enabling people to come for what they need, but not necessarily have a long-term relationship with us. Maybe it will spark an interest in them having a long-term relationship with us, but for a long time I've wanted to turn that library into a little bit of resource center, so when a beloved family pet dies in the neighborhood, people could come and get a little kit that they could take away, and little milestone resources. So I think we're going to have to just get beyond this building a lot more, and we'll see how that all plays out.
Yeah, the idea that we could be a place for people to kind of
come in and do service projects, right. Or even pick up a service project and take it to their Girl Scout troop, or we have to just enable people to take church with them, because asking them to continually just come to this building, I don't see the vision there. We have to take it to the streets. Sure.
So that's what you see in terms of programming and stuff. Speaking specifically about this congregation, if I was going to hand you a magic wand, or in honor of maybe the Harry Potter summer series, if you were going to say a Harry Potter charm, and you could change one thing in this congregation, one thing in this church, I actually wrote out a Harry Potter charm for you.
Of course you did.
Expensio changeo presto.
Expensive-o? I like that one.
Changeo presto. What would you like to see happen? What one change here at the church would you like to see?
I would love to see an elevator. I think an elevator would enable so much more intergenerational volunteering upstairs. I think there needs to be more cross-pollination between worship and education. And I think there's a lot of people in here who don't like to sit, and I think we can help, in that regard. I'll never forget that moment when we all danced together in Lander Hall, at the young and the old. I think I would love to see that. If I can't cure Kimmy's cancer, which I would do with a magic wand in a minute, it's, an elevator and, of course, abundant resources for this amazing place.
Yeah. Well, when we changed your title from Director of Religious Education to Minister of Faith Programs, there was some pushback, because the word minister carries weight.
Right.
But I've always maintained that minister is just a word. Just like president, or teacher, or coach, or lawyer, or parent, mom, dad. These are just words. And it really is what we bring to those words in terms of our authenticity, our integrity, our love for ourselves and for others that allow people to see us in those words. And I think changing your title to minister was the absolute right thing to do, because you didn't direct this congregation in its religious education. You ministered to us in your love and your grace, your inclusion of all children, young and old. And we have been blessed by you, and we have been changed by you, and we have been changed for the better because of who you are and your ministry here at this church. So I know I speak on behalf of the entire congregation when we say we love you and we'll miss you, but we will carry you with us and the legacy that you have granted us well into our future. And we could not be who we are today without who you are and who God has so graciously blessed you as a person and with the gifts that you have. So can we just give Mark just one big round of applause? That feels good. That feels real good. So we're going to end our interview this morning with the 3 questions that James Lipton always ends his interviews with. Those who are familiar with the show know these. So Margaret Stark, what is your favorite noise?
So when Patrick was home from college over the break, Duke and I would be going to bed at a reasonable hour, and our boys would stay up way too late, and we could hear them laughing and laughing and laughing. And so that's having lost both of my parents recently, the sibling experience it's precious. So to hear them laugh and make each other laugh well into the night is my favorite noise.
That's a great noise. One of our favorite things to do when we do OWL is to bring the youth into this room and to take different biological anatomies, parts, and ask them to say all the euphemisms they know for those, regardless of whether
breaking down barriers
with
right.
language, that's right. So in the spirit of that, as well as in the spirit of James Lipton and Inside the Actors Studio, Margaret Stark, what is your favorite curse word?
Well, I think you all know that I am a fan of period pieces on television and that I love anything British. I really, if I could be an Anglican, but you can't take all the, stand up, sit down, rah, rah, rah that goes on in the pews at the Episcopal Church. But I do love anything British, and there's nothing funnier than every British swear word with a British accent. It's the best. It's so good.
They do swear well.
They swear very well.
They do swear very well. And Margaret Stark, if heaven is real, when you get to the pearly gates, what do you hope St. Peter will say to you?
Okay. Well, of course you want to hear, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." But I really, really hope it's not St. Peter. I'll be so bummed out if it's St. Peter. I want it to be Mary Magdalene and every badass fallen woman of the Bible right there. Every woman's story who hasn't been told, and I want them to say, "This way to the dance floor."
Yeah. Excellent. May you dance well into the future, and may you dance for a very long time. We love you, and we have been so blessed to be your dance partner all of these years. Margaret Stark, everybody.